We are getting into a rookie Superflex mock draft. We're going to be analyzing the landing spots of these players, the prospect profiles of everything before the draft, and then how we like to approach our rookie drafts, right? Everyone takes a different strategy, and sometimes you have to change based on your team or where you're drafting. So we're going to get into all that stuff. But before we do, I want to remind you guys, hit that like button. It is just a huge deal for us. It helps us so much, helps us grow, continue our work for all of you. And if you're not subscribed, you need to be. Okay, this month is all about the rookie draft and dynasty content. And so if you have any questions about your rookie draft or your dynasty team in general, drop it in the comments below, and I'm going to do my best to get back to every single one of those. All right, Faraz, let's get started with round one here. And right at the top, I think this is pretty much going to be the 1-2 everywhere, maybe in different orders. But we got the 101, Bijan Robinson, the running back for the Falcons. And at the 102, Anthony Richardson, quarterback for the Colts. And I think both these guys ended up in really good landing spots that give them an opportunity to flourish at the next level. But I think this is a question that has been on a lot of people's minds if you're up near the front of your draft. And all right, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Okay, you are on the clock with the 101 in a super flex league. Who are you taking between Bijan Robinson and Anthony Richardson?
So I'm taking Bijan. If there was a slam dunk quarterback prospect in this class, I'd probably consider that, or even go in a different direction. But if there's any sort of like generational type of prospect, love that word, by the way. A lot of people don't like that word.
Everybody really liked that word this
It's actually my favorite word. It still is my favorite word. But I think that type of prospect has to be considered at the 101, even in a super flex league. Like if that guy was a wide receiver, even better for dynasty, right? Like, with the running back, it's like, well, shorter windows, that sort of thing. Like if it was there was like a Jamar Chase coming out, in this class, aside from what we already know of him as a pro, but as a prospect, he was one of those slam dunk type of prospects, right? So he could have been the 101 this year, but it would be between Bijan and Anthony Richardson, obviously, and the upside is immense for Richardson, right? But I think the value is higher for Bijan, and I'm a value drafter in Dynasty. And even if I'm not contending right now, which that's the best case scenario to draft Bijan, because like you might be a running back away, right, from winning it all. But you're holding a huge piece of value on your team either way that you can leverage, right? I'm not sure A-Rich holds that same type of value coming out of your rookie draft, even in Superflex, because if there's a win now team that needs a running back, right, and you're not quite ready to contend, that's a huge piece of leverage you have if you're trying to make a deal with that contending team at some point this year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that they look at fantasy kind of, and I mean, there's just a lot of different ways you can view it, but I think that so many people try to take that long-term approach almost too often, and they'll pass on a guy like Bijan because like, oh, well, running backs don't have a big window. It's like, dude, neither does fantasy football in general. Like everything changes from one year to the next,
Oh
and
yeah.
right as soon as we think we know a position, and wide receivers always return the most value. You get Antonio Brown and Michael Thomas who are at the top of their games, and then 1 to 2 years later, it's not the same anymore. So I think
Yep.
that it's what you're saying makes so much sense. Is you just got to go with the value when it's there, and not try to galaxy brain yourself out of a really good pick, especially if you're sitting there at the 101. Let's take a look at the next couple picks here. And at the 103, we go Bryce Young, quarterback for the Panthers. 104, Jahmyr Gibbs, running back for the Lions. And at 105, CJ Stroud comes off the board, quarterback for the Texans. And this has been interesting for us because I've been seeing CJ Stroud fall to the 105 in quite a few drafts now, where I think many people, especially for a super flex format, figured, okay, well, it's going to be, Bijan and then quarterback, right?
Right.
Now, all of a sudden with the Jahmyr Gibbs landing spot, and everyone sort of fell out of love with CJ Stroud after he was projected to go number 1, and then he was projected to go way later, and then he finally went number 2. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing him go to the 105 a lot. Is Jahmyr Gibbs really worth taking over a quarterback at that spot, even in Superflex?
I get why he's going there, the landing spot, obviously, but and then with Swift, leaving, everyone's like, oh man, this is going to be amazing. And then on top of that, like he got drafted like 12th overall, right? So
Yeah.
this is not, the draft capital is absolutely ridiculous, but I'm not doing it personally. Like I love Gibbs, but Stroud, he might be the safest quarterback in this draft, to be honest with you, like in this draft class, right? I mean, quarterback is king in this format. And just look at the value of mediocre starting quarterbacks in superflex leagues, right? Like he can be that at the very least, I think. So with Bijan, I will make that exception, but with Gibbs, someone who is most likely not going to have a goal line role, in the NFL. I don't want to pass up on a quarterback who was just taken top 2 in the NFL draft.
Yeah, I mean, if you when you're talking about it that way, you just put it really simply into that perspective. Quarterback that was number 2 overall in the draft, and then a sub 200-pound running back who's likely not to have a goal line role, and that's no shot at Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Like he's super talented, and he's going into a really good receiving role there with the Detroit Lions, but this is not the same argument of take Bijan number 1. This is a very different guy who's going to be in a much more limited role. Whereas, like you said, CJ Stroud may actually be the safest quarterback in this draft. And Faraz, I'm going to kind of go off script here and ask you this question because in Superflex, sometimes I hear this a lot, and I do think it makes sense. Is especially if you're getting your second quarterback in Superflex, it makes sense to go at the safer guy and maybe someone who's not as volatile, like an Anthony Richardson or Bryce Young. And if CJ Stroud is that safe guy, I mean, does that make just more sense to go with him, especially in a super flex like that?
I think if you're contending right now, excuse me, if you're contending right now and you can use that quarterback, I would say sure. But even that itself is a risk because I think the amount of upside that you're leaving on the table is a lot just by you contending. What I rather do is I rather grab someone like Anthony Richardson if I'm on the clock, and then make some moves, right? And then if I know that Anthony Richardson is not going to compete, if I have that feeling, at some point early in the year, then maybe I would make a move to get that quarterback who can fill my quarterback 2 spot. But while I'm in a draft, again, I'm taking that value. I'm taking, listen, man, like you want a guy who could break fantasy, right? And we talk about all our strategies, right, in different parts of your rookie draft. I'm somebody who's going to be chasing upside regardless. I think Anthony Richardson, he could come in and the fact that he landed on the Colts in the top 4 is
Oof,
reason
just
enough for me.
chef's kiss, man.
Right. Exactly, right? And that plays into it, to be honest with you, because if Richardson might had a different landing spot, I might be taking Stroud before him, honestly. So I just like the landing spot. Pre-draft, I ranked CJ Stroud ahead of Richardson, but post-draft, I'm taking Richardson, dude.
Yeah, and I think what you're pointing out here too is should be an overarching theme throughout this whole episode, which is you have to be fluid. You have to be able to change things up, and one, let the draft board just kind of come to you as it does, and then two, be willing to change your mind on prospects and reevaluate what's going on once we do have these landing spots. And I think that's been the thing that has changed a lot here for so many of these prospects. Now, we get to some of our next picks here 106 through 109. We had 4 receivers come off the board: Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, and Zay Flowers. And I've seen a lot of different orders for these receivers, and I know my 4, how I would rank them. Faraz, I want to know how you rank these guys: JSN, Addison, Johnston, and Flowers. Let me hear it.
So post-draft, I have
Yeah.
JSN, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, then Quentin Johnston. I actually have, like, listen, man, I know people might think I'm crazy, but I had Josh Downs ahead of Quentin Johnston pre-draft. Now, post-draft, I don't. Okay, and there are a bunch of reasons why, but these are similar to the rankings I had pre-draft. Like all 4 of these guys went in the first round, so I can kind of stick to my guns for the most part on this one. Like I tend not to overvalue landing spot too much in Dynasty. I will overvalue draft capital though, right? And like I may like Addison, a little bit more than Zay Flowers in year 1, but I still like, for example, like in year 1, would I be surprised if Addison outperforms JSN? No, I don't think I would be surprised, but I still like JSN way more long term. And I had Zay Flowers ranked above Addison as my number 2 wide receiver in this class before the landing spot, but I had him in a similar tier as Addison. So since I like the Addison's landing spot a little bit more, I moved him, slightly above Zay. But again, you know, I'm ranking these guys pretty closely for the most part, between my pre-draft and post-draft rankings.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty similar with you there. I think JSN still continues to have the best long-term value there. Jordan Addison is probably going to be the most productive guy in year 1. And then, Quentin Johnson here, he went 108 with Zay Flowers going 109. And I mean, I don't dislike the landing spot for Quentin Johnston. I'm just still not completely sold on the prospect. And I think that he's got a lot of things that he has to fix. And he's not only just going to be the number 3 receiver, but he's going to be the number 4 target on that team for now. And we really don't know how that offense is going to progress and who's going to be there a year from now. And things could change a lot. But I mean, stuff does look pretty, it's looking up for Quentin Johnston and the Chargers right now. Zay Flowers is the other one, though, man, with Todd Monken coming in there to that Baltimore offense, and now this is becoming it's becoming a very different look. And you can make a lot of the same arguments for Zay that he's not going to be the number one target there, right? It's Mark Andrews, but I still think that number two target is very much up for grabs. And he may not be the top target on the team, but he could easily become the top receiver in year one. And Zay is just so dynamic that whether he's getting those short routes, those crossers, those screen passes, those are the things that he can just do a lot with there.
And he can play all over the field, right? And he's not somebody who's going to be pigeonholed into the slot or anything like that. He can play flanker. He could play X if he needs to. So he's somebody who's super versatile, right? You have OBJ. Who knows what version of OBJ we're going to get, right? And listen, man, Rashad Bateman. I was a fan of Rashad Bateman. I thought that he could potentially break out last year. Foot injuries are tough, man. So I don't know how he's going to come back from that. Now, a lot of people just cue the jokes of Lamar's wide receivers and how many 4 targets a game, right? But again, Greg Roman is out, right? Like you just mentioned, right? They have Todd Monken coming in, pass happy guy. Now, is Lamar going to throw the ball 45 times? No, but he's going to drop back more. There's more opportunity for him to rush. I know we're not talking about Lamar here, but I'm giddy over Lamar next year, to be honest with you. I think he's gonna have a monster year. Anyway, Zay Flowers, I totally agree with you. I think he is in line to compete for the number one wide receiver on this team, even in year one. I would not be surprised if he was the number one targeted wide receiver. And if that happens, no, guys, it's not going to be 4 to 5 targets a game. Okay, this is a different system, and I think he's going to excel in it.
Yeah, I think that the thing that gets lost here amongst all four of these wide receivers is all four of them ended up on good offenses. And I think that that was something that a lot of people were missing out on when they're, oh man, these wide receivers are really falling in the draft. And I guess they're not really as good as we thought. And well, they all four ended up in good offenses in pretty good scenarios. Now, they may not be the Jamar Chases of the world, but man, they can still be pretty productive for fantasy. So I'm excited to see where they end up going here over the next couple of years. But we move on from the wide receivers there and we get to the 110 for us, where you were up on the clock and you went with Will Levis, quarterback for the Titans. And it appears that you took the poison pill that basically a lot of people don't want to take, right? It just seems like this unanimously disliked quarterback. But because of the format, because of the remaining talent, there's an argument to be made here that he kind of has to become the de facto pick at the 110. Is that how you felt with this slot here?
100%. Like as soon as I didn't even take my time with this pick. I remember when I was doing this draft, like as soon as it was my turn, all 4 of those wide receivers were off the board, right? The top 2 running backs were off the board. The top 3 quarterbacks were off the board. I was at the 10 spot. I think the de facto pick at that spot is Will Levis. Like I wouldn't be mad if anyone took Levis ahead of a couple of these wide receivers either. Like I wouldn't be mad. I wouldn't do it personally. But you got to be aware of the upside and you got to be aware of the format that you're in. Like this guy was potentially going to be taken in the top 10 of the NFL draft. Like we've seen other good NFL quarterbacks fall in the draft in the past, right? He has a big arm. He's a big guy. He can be used around the goal line. He has the upside of being a good NFL quarterback. He definitely needs to clean up the mistakes and decision making and all that. But second round draft capital, that doesn't kill him, right? He's in line to be Ryan Tannehill's heir apparent. And, I think it's lining up for him just fine in the NFL. So in a Superflex league, once the guys before him are off the board, he's pretty much my auto pick at that spot.
Yeah, and you talk about him being the heir apparent, and that might come sooner rather than later. There's already talk that Ryan Tannehill's got about 4 games, and if the team is not looking good, they're ready to yank him out and make he's gonna have a short leash on him this year. And I think that the Titans I think they're becoming a bit more self-aware that if they can't be winning games early, they're just going to have to blow it all up and rebuild. And I think that's where you get all those rumors of Derrick Henry potentially being traded, right? And I got to mention this, man. You were lucky to get Will Levis at the 110 because when we originally started this mock draft, whoever was there at the 101 took Will Levis as a joke. And they were like, all right, good joke, man. Funny. All right, let's start this again. And then boom, they take Will Levis again. I'm like, all right, you're out. Get out the club. So yeah, you were lucky to get Will Levis at the 110, man.
Yeah, I really was. And it's funny because when you let us grab our spots, right? And I think, there's a lot of talk about what's going to happen early in the rounds, what's going to happen in the middle rounds. But I think it's important to talk about Will Levis and, his spot and where he belongs in the Superflex conversation, because again, he was being talked among the other four quarterbacks, right? You didn't know where he was going to go off the board. So second round draft capital, I'm happy. After second round, like bets are off with quarterbacks, right? Like I'm not even gonna like bother, even in super flex leagues, right? So he was in a great situation, and I think at the 110, like I'm happy he was there. I'm happy that you were able to restart that draft because otherwise it would have been a lot tougher of a decision.
Yeah, dude, you talk about drafting for value. The guy that was going one-on-one fell to you at 110. But all right, we finished up the first round here with Dalton Kincaid going at the 111. He's the new tight end for the Bills, and then Zach Charbonnet, probably the most disappointing draft pick of the entire NFL draft this year, goes at the 112. And I think that there's something to be said here. Like we took a second here to talk about Will Levis, talk about that 110 because there is, I don't want to say a major drop off of talent, but I think there's a lot more volatility when you get to pick 10, 11, 12, where you're kind of not sure where to go. And I think there's a lot of people that are deciding between, okay, Dalton Kincaid or Will Levis, or, maybe I already have Ken Walker on my team and I really want that handcuff. So I think there's a lot of different ways to go. And or Faraz, I think you went what would be the most valuable way, especially for Superflex. I stay standing Dalton Kincaid here for the Bills. I think he's going to have a really fun role for that team going forward. But before we go forward to the second round here, I want to let you guys know you can become an Elite Football Guys subscriber. And when you do, you're going to get access to all of our awesome Dynasty content just like this. And we have an amazing trade value chart, our premium research articles. You're also going to get custom in-season player projections, rankings, waiver wire reports, all kinds of stuff. And on top of that, you get our draft dominator, our league dominator tools that you can customize to your team, your league. And guess what? That's going to include your rookie drafts. Okay. So much more than just watching this video or reading the articles. You're actually going to have a tool that is helping you throughout your rookie draft. Make sure that you get the best value, just like Faraz is talking about here. So let's move on to our round two. And we see another tight end, Michael Mayer, come off the board here at the 201. And he ended up in a pretty good spot. I think for a lot of people, he was the tight end one for a while. He was my tight end too. To see him go in the second round, I think was pretty surprising. We saw two tight ends get drafted here in the top 13 picks. And I know tight ends, it's not typically the prospect that you're drafting early, right, in these rookie drafts, and because they don't provide much value in their first couple seasons. Do you think that these guys can break the mold? Probably not in that Kyle Pitts sort of mold there, but do you think that they break the mold and give you some good value, a return on value here in year one?
Do I think they break the mold? I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know
It's
if
a
it
loaded
matters what I
question.
think. Yeah, I don't know if it matters what I think, to be honest with you, because I don't know if it does. And if anyone tells you that these guys are different, like I want to know why, because we've seen some great prospects drafted in the first round of NFL drafts. Like we haven't seen a whole lot of good correlation like we do with running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks. So me personally, Kincaid going at the 111 in this particular draft, Michael Mayer going at 201. I think it's way too early for me. It's not. I don't want to draft the tight end that early. And yes, they don't provide value early on in their careers, but there's also a good chance that they never provide any value at all, right? Or at least any difference making value, right?
Right.
And I think that's really what it comes to when it comes to the tight end position. I think for tight end, it matters way more for, having a positional advantage. Like when you have the Kelseys and when you have the Mark Andrews 2 years ago, like you had a serious positional advantage. And if you had them, there's a good chance that you were making it to a championship. And those are the type of prospects or type of players already in the NFL that I want to chase after in Dynasty. Like I don't think Kincaid's profile or Mayer's profile are bulletproof. Like I like both of them, but I don't think I'm going to have any of these guys, if this is where they're going to be taken in these rookie drafts. I'm looking at these other running backs. I'm looking at these other wide receivers being taken around them. And I'm worried because like in non-super flex dynasty rookie drafts, these guys are going to be taken like middle of the first round, towards like what at the 108, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's just a little early for me, man. I think my strategy is more around, trying to chase already good tight ends in the NFL.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about the tight end class here because I think we hit what looks like a sweet spot later on in this draft. But I think that one of the things that I tend to look for is I want to see the guys that have the athleticism. Michael Mayer is not necessarily that guy with the overwhelming athleticism, but Dalton Kincaid is a pretty good athlete. He is a good route runner. He is a good run after catch guy. And our very own Jeff Bell here at Football Guys, he said that if Dalton Kincaid ends up in that slot role for the Bills, and he's a Bills fan, so he has a little bit of that insight there. But if he ends up in that slot role for the Bills, something where it's like what Cole Beasley was getting, where it was 100 plus targets, and I'm not suggesting he will get that in year one or even year two, but if it's somewhere near that, as a tight end, you're looking at a guy that potentially becomes a little bit of a cheat code, right? And that's maybe overstating it a bit, but these are the things that you do have to consider when looking at players like this, and that's why landing spot matters so much. All of a sudden, it changes a little bit for Dalton Kincaid being on the Bills. So let's take a look at these next four picks here. And we got Devon Achane going at the 202, Kendra Miller at the 203, Jonathan Mingo at the 204, and then the guy you mentioned earlier, Josh Downs at the 205. So we've got four players here that, I mean, I've seen them go, some of them up in round one, some of them go late round two. Who's your favorite prospect among some of these early round two selections here between Achane, Miller, Mingo, and Downs?
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, like I love Josh Downs. However, I do think that there's more upside with Kendra Miller. You know, he's my guy, dude. Like I love him as a prospect. I actually moved him above Charbonnet post draft. I think a lot of people might have because of the landing spot. I had him at 4 pre draft, and now I have him at 3 because of the landing spots for both of these guys. You know, like you mentioned earlier, Charbonnet's spot is just brutal. And I think there are a few different ways Miller can get on the field. I don't think it's just via an Alvin Kamara suspension. I don't think if you draft him, I don't think you just have to be banking on an Alvin Kamara suspension. But he got the draft capital we needed on a team that's going to need a running back very soon at the very least. And there are a few reasons to be concerned about Kamara, even on the field, outside of his off the field issues.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said. You've mentioned draft capital a couple times. A team does not take a running back this early if they don't intend to use them, especially if it's, running back's considered to be one of the most replaceable positions. And so many teams just wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And when you see a guy like Kendra Miller get taken early and he's got the build, he's got the production profile to, work as a starting running back in the league. He maybe doesn't have all the receiving stuff that everyone wants, but yeah, he can be on the field early. I'm with you. I really liked Kendra Miller a lot coming out. He was one of my top 4 running backs as well. And I think there is 100% an argument to be made for him to be ahead of Zach Charbonnet. And I have seen him go at the end of round 1 there. So I think it's kind of a pick your flavor when you start to get to this point of the running backs and the wide receivers. Let's keep going on here. At the 206, we see Tank Bigsby, running back for the Jaguars. Then at the 207, I took Jaden Reed. At 208, Rashee Rice comes off the board. And at 209, Tyjae Spears. And Tyjae Spears is a guy that I had ranked really, really high at the running back position. I loved Tyjae because of his skill set, because of his production in his final year. It just seemed like everything looked really, really rosy for him. And then all of a sudden we get the medical reports coming through about his knee, about a guy that may not have longer than 2 to 3 seasons in the league. How does something like that change your approach when you're looking at a guy like Tyjae Spears in a rookie draft?
I wasn't expecting a long career anyway for any running back, especially a running back who is, a little bit undersized. Like running backs are not a long-term ad to begin with, right? So I wouldn't even assume more than a few years when you're drafting a running back, and especially an older one, right? Remember, he was at the Senior Bowl. He's not one of these younger running backs coming off their junior year. But if I have a need for a running back at this point of the draft, especially this late, he was taken at what, the 209. So yeah, like who are you so excited to draft over him? At that spot, like I can see a case for Mims, for Roshan, right? Roshan Johnson, sure, if you're competing right now. But yeah, like at this spot, like I'm cool with Tajay, even with him not playing with an ACL, right? I love the joke, like if you don't have it, you can't tear it, right? So,
Right, right.
but he did, he tore his ACL 2 times already. The second time he came back from it, like he absolutely killed it the following year, dude. Like there was no down year for him. Like it was just, if you were just looking at his box score for his career, you'd be like, wait, when did he tear his ACL, right? Because you kind of don't see that there. And he was extremely efficient as well. Like he wasn't just productive, which is insane, coming off an ACL. But again, Derrick Henry is still there. How long will you have to wait? I think that's the question. And I'm that guy who's just looking at it, like an idiot every year because, I think it's going to happen before it does with Derrick Henry. And now I just have to accept that this dude is just built different, right? But we'll see, like if that ever happens. But Tajay, I think, is easily the next man up there. We have to know that he's just not built for an every down workload. So he can have a 3-down role. I think still not an every down role, but a 3-down role, right? Because he's very good on early downs. He's not just a pass catcher; he's a very good pass catcher too. As the roster stands right now, like he doesn't have much competition. Like assuming Henry isn't available, like Hassan Haskins, like, I don't think he's that good of a running back, to be honest with you. Like, he didn't get high draft capital or anything like that. I saw him at the Senior Bowl last year. He was okay. So yeah, I don't think that's much competition. Maybe he complements Spears on early downs a little bit, in the event that Henry isn't available. But like you mentioned, man, his last game at USC, Tajay Spears, absolutely
Oof.
killed it, dude. Ball out of
Yes.
control, man. Like, I watched him do his thing at the Senior Bowl. Like, absolutely did his thing there. Like, I just spoke to Tajay recently. He's obviously psyched to get the third round draft capital. Like, I think he's going to do just fine for a little while. You have to have concerns long term, but like, don't project a running back long term to begin with. I think over the next 2-3 years, I still think he can contribute.
Yeah, I think that the biggest I think factor here is going to be what you mentioned earlier, which is Derrick Henry, right? I think every year we keep saying this is going to be the year he falls off the age cliff, and he just doesn't. And I think that fantasy is just littered with these names of guys that we thought were going to be the next Tennessee Titans great running back behind Derrick Henry or the next great handcuff. And I love Tajay Spears as a prospect, I really do, and I'm willing to take the risk on him, especially at this pick at 209. If you're a contending team, you go out and get the guy. But I think the reason I passed up on him at the 207 is because you're talking about, man, if Derrick Henry continues to get the role he's getting, well, you're missing out on year one of a lot of production from Tajay Spears. Then
Yeah,
it's like, it's maybe, what are we figuring out in year two? Is Derrick Henry going to play a minimal role? Is he, scaling back? Is he gone from the team? What's happening? And then from there, we talk about, all right, he's super talented, but he's probably not going to be an every down guy. And so that's where you have to sort of like draw your line is what are you comfortable with? Especially, dude, if you're getting to the end of the second round here, you're pretty comfortable with anything. If you can get some production, you take it. But I can see where maybe someone who's a rebuilding team, or they say, yeah, I'm not one or two pieces away. You don't grab
right,
a guy like that. You go for someone
right.
else. Now, here
Agreed.
at the 210, you took one of my favorite prospects in the wide receiver group, and I mentioned Jaden Reed, who I also like, but you took Marvin Mims here at the 210 wide receiver for the Broncos, and I love the fit there. I love that they traded up for him. This is Sean Payton's first draft pick with this team. When he trades up for guys, he wants to use them, and Mims is a deep ball receiver going to a quarterback that throws a pretty good deep ball. So I want to hear I may have just stolen all your thunder there, man. So my bad.
No,
But what makes you like Marvin Mims here in Denver? And then I also want to ask how you like Jaden Reed over on the Packers.
yeah, man. Mims has one of the best analytical profiles among all these wide receivers in this class. And I like the landing spot, like you mentioned, with Russell Wilson, right? Somebody who has been known for kind of getting out of the pocket, getting off script a little bit, and hitting those deep shots. I don't know if you remember this, but and I'm just thinking about this right now, like as I'm talking. But Sean Payton, when he first got with the team, he said that we're going to do things that Russell Wilson does best, and he included those off-script type of throws. Now I'm thinking, like, okay, Marvin Mims fits that. I like that. So the landing spot there with Sean Payton, I got to write that down. Elite speed, obviously the elite speed, right? I think he ran a 4.38, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
He does, I think that speed is more so when he doesn't have the ball in his hands rather than when he has the ball in his hands. But he's obviously, he's a great athlete. 18-year-old breakout age, man. And so, like when I'm looking at that, it's just like, dude, like if you're balling against these like 22-year-olds, like you're going to be, there's a good chance you're going to be good. He had the second highest career yards per route run in this class among Power 5 wide receivers. He had the second highest career big play rate in this class, only behind JSN. I mean, how can you not be interested in that, right? He makes some incredible catches too. Couple them on the sideline behind guys' backs. Like, come on, son. You know what I'm saying? Like he's killing
Come
it.
on,
So
son.
sorry, I got my New York coming out of me
I love it.
sometimes. Now I'm not sure his upside is like a team's wide receiver one,
Right.
but I think he can be a pretty good wide receiver two, for a team who can make some big plays. So like for fantasy, I can see him carving out a like fantasy wide receiver three type of role, with these boom weeks, right? Where like, he has like 100 yards and a touchdown and he'll end up being in the top 12, top 15, right? I can see that type of role for him. So with Sean Payton, man, we've seen these wide receivers do well, especially guys who go deep, right? And he might be one of those guys who can do more than that, right? So I'm really interested to see what he does with both Sean Payton and Russell Wilson.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said that when you look at the roster, they have guys that are similar to him. You know, Tim Patrick, who was the deep ball wide receiver, but he's coming off an injury. KJ Hamler, who's an explosive little guy, but he really hasn't done much throughout his career there. So I think Sean Payton's looking at this roster and he's like, yeah, I want to go and get my guy. I want to have someone that fits that mold. And I mean, there's also the rumors that Cortland Sutton might not be there that much longer. So you're talking about a rookie wide receiver who might have a really strong initial role on a team that really wants to use him in a very dynamic type of offensive skill set. So that's pretty exciting there.
Yeah,
All right,
no, for sure, man. And did you want to talk about Jaden Reed or?
yeah. Let's hit on Jaden Reed really quick because I like him. I took him at the 207, man. I think he's got one of these really cool skill sets where he could become a target funnel for Jordan Love in that Packers offense. But I want to hear what you think about him.
I did like Jaden Reed, like overall as a prospect. Like if I wasn't looking at analytics at all, like if I'm looking at two guys, I like Jaden Reed over Mims. I just didn't expect him to get the draft capital that he did, and I'm
I,
super happy that he
as
got
much
it.
as I liked him, I didn't expect it either, man. That was really high. I was pretty surprised.
Yeah, and even pre-draft, like I do look at expected draft capital, and I factor that into my rankings. So now that he got the draft capital that I wanted, like I moved him up now, man. So like I do like the fact that you took Jaden Reed over Marvin Mims. I would have done the same. I'm a little disappointed that he didn't have an amazing senior year. But that entire Michigan State offense, took a hit. They lost Kenneth
Oof.
Walker and a few other guys. But he broke out at 18 as well, man, before he transferred over to Michigan State. And I think I agree with you, dude. Like, I think he could challenge Christian Watson for that top target earner spot, right? More than people think. I think in this class he might be a top 3 or 4 separator, to be honest with you. Like at the Senior Bowl, I
He was
watched
crushing
him.
it.
Like he was number one, I think, in terms of like separation at the line. I think number two was probably like Tank Dell, and then number three was Michael Wilson, right? Those are like the top three guys in terms of like separating themselves at the line and doing that thing. So like I think, I think this is exactly what Jordan Love needed, dude. So I'm glad. I like the landing spot because they needed a wide receiver pretty badly.
Yeah, Jordan Love's a big winner in Dynasty right now. And if you invested him a while back or you made a trade for him when Jordan Love value was down bad, you're feeling good this year because they have really invested around him and things are looking good. Let's finish out the end of the second round here. You see Hendon Hooker go to the Hendon Hooker of the Lions go here at the 211, and then Jalen Hyatt closed out the second round here, wide receiver for the Giants. And I think this is where you could start to make cases of guys that should be pushed up into the second round or guys that maybe you can push back into the third. But before we get into that third round, if you've listened this far, I hope that means this show has been of some value to you and that you're enjoying what we're talking about. And if you are, could you please just take a quick second and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast? It just means so much to us here at Football Guys and here at the Pretend GM. We just those little 5-star reviews or whatever your feedback is, it matters to us a lot and it helps us make the show better for you. We can continue our content here for you now in this Dynasty rookie season. Faraz, let's get into our round three here, where we start to see some players that, man, big names that I think we liked a bit more before the draft, like here at the 301. Cedric Tillman goes to the Browns. And then at the 302, Sam Laporta, who I think that could be a really juicy one at the 302. Roshan Johnson at the 303 goes to the Bears. And at 304, Luke, I want to make sure I say this right. I'm probably not going to. It's either Schoonmaker or Schoonmaker, or I've heard a lot of different ways. But either way, the tight end for the Cowboys that came from Michigan. And then at the 305, we got Luke Musgrave, tight end for the Packers. So I remember I teased this could be that tight end sweet spot here at the early third. And at least it was here in our mock draft. And these guys all kind of have an opportunity for some early production, and to get on the field early. And you don't typically see that with tight ends. So, Faraz, in your opinion, is this the tight end sweet spot, or is this kind of like this is just where they fell? It doesn't actually mean you have to take one.
Yeah, I'm on the ladder on that one. Like I
Yeah,
don't think this is a sweet spot really. Like I'm cool with Laporta here, like because you got to remember he was taken before Michael
Michael
Mayer,
Mayer. Yeah,
right? So like that's something to consider. The fact that he's going this late, like I'd rather take a shot on him now than Mayer at the where was he taking at the 201, right? So I'd rather do that. So I'm okay with that. But again, I don't really want to bother with any of these other tight ends at this point. Let other people draft them. In my opinion, like I'll trade for good tight ends later. There's always like a handful of tight ends, that are difference makers every year. Like, well, I mean, not even, right? Like, it's only like 1 or 2 guys every year that's really like real difference makers at the position. Like, you could be top 5 and still not be a huge difference maker at the position. So, I just don't want to take shots on guys who have very small chances of having any dynasty value, let alone being a viable fantasy tight end. So, I think I'd rather continue to draft for value on guys who I think can be legit contributors at other positions like running back and wide receiver.
Yeah, it almost feels like if you're willing to make the bet that the tight end is not going to produce, you're more likely to win that bet. Nine times
Yeah,
out of 10.
You know,
I am
it's also super subjective too. You know, like you might like a
right.
guy, and it's like, is your opinion that much better than everybody else's? And everybody likes different guys at certain spots, and at this point of the draft, like you just kind of let the draft come to you, and don't you don't have to reach on this position. I think it's one of those positions that you just don't have to reach on, even if you like a guy.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing to do in any of these rookie drafts or even a startup draft is try not to reach for players. Just let the board come to you. We talk about this all the time with the NFL draft about, oh, this is just the smartest team, the best GM. They draft so well every year. It's always teams like the Steelers and the Ravens and all those guys that they let the board come to them. The Eagles, Howie Roseman, he just let the board come to him, man. And you can make a trade when something seems opportune, but I mean, especially in your rookie drafts, let the board come to you. You don't have to reach for guys because honestly, even as much as we think we know these prospects, it still kind of becomes a crapshoot. We have a lot less control over this than we think. We get here to the end of round 3, where you start to see a lot of players who I think this is kind of like what I call like the flyer part of the draft, right? I think all of round 3 is really the flyer part. You're just seeing, okay, I would say it's probably even less than 50-50. It's probably more like 40-60, 30-70 if these guys are actually
Yeah,
going to be good in the league. But you see Izzy Abanikanda come off the board at the 306, Eric Gray to the Giants, 307, Keyshawn Boutte or Booty. I'm just going to go with Booty because that's a lot more fun to say
yeah,
at the
yeah.
308. 309, Darnell Washington. I think that was a big letdown for a lot of people because those medicals, and now he's going to be behind Pat Fryermuth. And at the 310, you took Michael Wilson. You mentioned him earlier as being one of those really good separators that came out of the Senior Bowl. And we're going to get to him in a second because I do want to ask you about him. At the 311, we see Chase Brown. That I think a lot of people are blowing him up way too much because everyone is assuming that Joe Mixon is going to be off that Bengals team and that Chase Brown is this next guy. Uh, come on, guys. Did we not learn our lesson with Chris Evans and all these other running backs that we just boosted up because they were the quote backup behind Joe Mixon? And then at the 312, we see Stetson Bennett come off the board here. And the Rams were apparently really excited to get Stetson Bennett. But you took Michael Wilson here at the 310. And I think there's like a realistic chance that he could find his way onto the field early for the Cardinals, work on the outside. We still don't know what's going to happen with DeAndre Hopkins. It seems like he's going to stay there, but even if he does, there's a lot of movement that could happen on this offense where you could see Hollywood Brown go inside. DeAndre Hopkins moves all over the offense, and Michael Wilson could find himself into 3 wide receiver sets early. So I want to ask you, when you get to this part of your draft, a little bit later in these rounds, how does your strategy change? Because Michael Wilson is a guy that I think not too many people are familiar with.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where it's like a boom bust type of situation because Michael Wilson, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. A couple of these wide receivers who are taken later in these drafts, they haven't been able to stay healthy. And Michael Wilson, he had a really really strong showing at the Senior Bowl, and he wasn't supposed to be taken this early in the NFL draft. Like when his name was called on the third round, dude. Like I was hyped, man. I was so hyped because he was one of my favorite wide receivers. I create a rookie kit, okay? I didn't even include him in there because I was not expecting him to get the draft capital anywhere near the draft capital that he deserved. Post draft, he's there. And he's one of my favorite wide receivers. Now, he profiles as an X, right? And if DeAndre Hopkins is going to be moved, okay, he's going to start. He's going to start for this team as the X wide receiver. I think Hollywood will be the flanker. Rondell Moore's going to continue to play that slot position. So, especially with now I think DeAndre Hopkins, if he stays there, he's actually going to be moved around more now that Cliff Kingsbury isn't there, right?
Yeah.
Because he kind of stuck him in the same spot on every single play. However, I think moving forward, I think that they knew what they were getting in Michael Wilson. They took a shot on him, 3rd round draft capital. If you can get a 3rd round draft capital, wide receiver, in this late in the draft, I think you have to do it.
Yeah, especially with a potential, a quarterback that he's probably not going to be back early, Kyler Murray, because of the injury. But if you've got a guy that is, kind of a year in, year out, don't want to overstate this, but potentially MVP candidate, one of the better passers in the league in a potentially good offense. Yeah, like that is the type of shot that you want to take here, especially late in round 3. Like that's honestly, I applaud the move and I loved it. And actually, after I made my selection of Eric Gray, I was like, You're an idiot, Alfredo. Why didn't you just go with Michael Wilson? Like, that's who I wanted anyways. Like, I don't know why. I
Right.
was just like, let me take the handcuff to Saquon Barkley at this point. But yeah, I love that pick there with Michael Wilson. And I agree. You know, as you get later in the draft, swing for those fences, man. This is the time to do it. Let's take a look at round 4 here, where, man, if round 3 is swinging for the fences, I don't know what round 4 is. It's you're really just diving deep into your bag here. But let's take a look at some of these names here. At the 401, we see Dorian Thompson-Robinson come off the board. And to be honest, I don't even know if I'm drafting him even in Superflex leagues. I'm not into it. But at the 402 and from 402 through 40, let's say 405 here, there's some interesting names. Zach Evans, running back for the Rams. 403, Tank Dell, wide receiver for the Texans. Puka Nacua at the 404, wide receiver for the Rams. And Tyler Scott, wide receiver for the Bears. And well, I think Tyler Scott's a little bit redundant in the skill set for Darnell Mooney and the Bears. These other 3 names, though,
Agreed.
Zach Evans, Tank Dell, and Nacua. I wasn't super high on Zach Evans. I wasn't super high on Tank Dell. I wasn't super high on Puka Nacua, but I was high enough on them. And I like their prospect profiles. And they have all ended up in situations where they could, once again, I think I've overused this phrase a lot in this episode, but be productive in year 1. And, you know, Zach Evans is basically just going to be fighting with Kyron Williams for that RB2 spot. Tank Dell, we already hear the rumors that CJ Stroud told the Texans, I want you to go get him. And CJ Stroud had more power on the Texans team than Aaron Rodgers had in like 10 years with the Packers. And he did it in his first 15 minutes with the team. So I think that's just crazy. But, you know, one of the names that really stands out to me here is Puka Nacua, a guy who is a big body wide receiver who can play on that outside and play. And he can honestly play the X for this Rams team that does not have a guy that fits that mold. You've got Cooper Kupp in the slot. You got Van Jefferson at the Z, and Tutu Atwell just kind of comes in for random plays here and there. But we never really see something like this where a player that I think a lot of the scouting community liked, a lot of the draft community liked as well, ends up on a good team like this. And so I scoured your Instagram a little bit. I know that you're into Puka Nacua here, but I want to hear your thoughts on him and specifically also Tank Dell too, because I think those are 2 receivers that could be steals here in the 4th round.
100%, man. I'm good with either of these guys. I think Puka has a little bit more upside. I think he has a chance of starting day 1 for
Yeah.
Sean McVay and the Rams, man. And that intrigues me so much for obvious reasons, right? And there's no other wide receiver that you really care that much about. I know there are some stands, I get it, whatever. Don't count Puka out. I think he's somebody who has had tremendous injury issues throughout college. However, if he can stay on the field, he was one of the most efficient college wide receivers over the last 2 seasons, like top 2, top 3 in yards per route run. Okay, so you gotta pay attention to this guy. Even with the later draft capital, I still think that the Rams are going to use this guy. Now, I know, Evan Hull was taken to extremely good pass catching running back, has a 3-down skill set, if he has to be called upon. So like, there's a couple guys in this range that I kind of like, but Puka, like I watched him at the Senior Bowl, dude. Like he was there on day 1 in practice. He was catching everything and he was being targeted on like every other play. He was so good on day 1 at the Senior Bowl that we never saw him again. And it wasn't an injury.
Right.
It was most likely his agent coming in and saying, hey, I think we're done here. I think we're done here. And that's the same thing that happened to Alec Pierce the year before at the Senior Bowl. He had a great day 1, they pulled him. And I think that's what they did with Puka. And I hyped Puka like crazy too, like after that day 1. And like, I was just like, I was looking forward to seeing him on day 2. I was like, where's Puka? Like, and I was looking everywhere, but it was no news of an injury or anything like that. So very, very excited to see Puka in his new landing spot.
Yeah, you and everybody else were hyping Puka out of the Senior Bowl that week after that first just day of practice and seeing him out there, man. Like he looked really good, and I think he goes into this spot that I think we were hyping up Allen Robinson last year in this spot, and years before that we were talking about how Robert Woods was such a value, and now you're talking about Cooper Kupp that's a year older, coming off injury, and they really don't have anything else in this Rams offense at the wide receiver position. Like you go and look at the depth chart, and it's Lance McCutcheon and Tutu Atwell and Van Jefferson, who can give you some splash plays, and he's a solid player. But Puka's actually got a shot to be productive here in year 1. Now, the other guy I wanted you to talk about here is Tank Dell, wide receiver for the Texans. Are we making too much of the fact that CJ Stroud asked for this guy personally? Because like you mentioned, he's a good route runner, really, really small. He would be an outlier in the league if he's able to produce. Is this someone that you're targeting in the 4th round here?
Because like you mentioned, that he would be an outlier. If guys like Puka are on the board, I'd rather go there. Now, I know the main difference here also is like, well, Tank got the draft capital that you rather have, right? So, you have to consider that as well. However, he would still be a major outlier at his size. I'm a fan of his, man. Like, I think I would love for him to break the mold a little bit. I'm not making too much of CJ Stroud, calling, you know, you, for his team to draft him, because it might not end up working out, right? And
Right.
I love him as a separator, but I'm not going out of my way to draft him, I would say, this late.
All right, so let's review this round 4 here. Like we mentioned, you got Dorian Thompson Robinson at the 401, Zach Evans at the 402, Tank Dell 403, at 404 Puka Nakua, one of our favorite round 4 flyers there. At the 405, Tyler Scott, 406 Parker Washington, wide receiver for the Jags. At the 407, Evan Hull, running back for the Colts. 408, Dwayne McBride, running back for the Vikings, whose value could change dramatically if Dalvin Cook is no longer there. At the 409, you see A.T. Perry go off the board, and he's now on the Saints. At the 410, Faraz, you took Xavier Hutchinson, another Texans wide receiver with a really good production profile coming out of college, but maybe not the best athlete. But once again, another guy going into a good scenario. And then to close out this draft, we see Trey Tucker, wide receiver for the Raiders at the 411, and then Deuce Vaughn, the feel-good story of the NFL draft, come off the board here with the very last pick at the 412. Well, Faraz, we did it, man. We did it. We did 4 rounds, 48 prospects. It was a lot. We did a bit of a deep dive here, but this was a lot of fun, man. A huge thank you to Faraz Siddiqi of Upper Hand Fantasy. Again, if you can remind people where they can find you on social media and check out all your content.
Yeah, man, appreciate you having me again. Upper Hand Fantasy over on Instagram is probably the best place that you can find me. I appreciate it once again.
No, of course, man. You're always welcome here anytime. And absolutely go and check out Upper Hand Fantasy on Instagram. The content is A+. Love it. For myself, for Faraz, we want to thank you guys for listening and watching all the way through. Until next time, adios.